Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Connor Bryan, and I should have forgotten the case of Jessica Chen, but something brought me back to that cursed forest on October 13th, 2018. 6 months had passed since that 22-year-old graduate student vanished without a trace from the Cascade National Forest, and every rational part of my brain told me to let it go. But Jessica's mother called me 3 days ago, her voice cracking like old bark when she whispered, "Connor, they found something. I've been ranging these mountains for 18 years and nothing scares me. Not the cougars that stalk through midnight snow, not the bears defending cubs, not the cliffs that drop into darkness deeper than God intended. I've pulled bodies from avalanches, tracked lost hikers through blizzards that would freeze lesser men solid, and faced down meth heads with shotguns who thought my forest was their personal chemistry lab. But Mrs. Chen's voice on that phone call made my hands shake for the first time since I was a rookie. The something they found was Jessica's Berkeley research notebook, pristine and dry despite 6 months of Pacific Northwest rain, placed deliberately on the exact spot where her trail went cold. Not dropped. Placed. The pages inside were filled with her handwriting, but the entries dated 3 weeks after her disappearance. Entries that made my blood run cold when I read them in evidence lockup, my mag light casting dancing shadows across words that shouldn't exist. Day 1. They're teaching me things the university never could. The old ways. The hungry ways. Day 8. I understand now why they chose me. My research on indigenous burial grounds wasn't academic curiosity. It was calling. They've been waiting. Day 23. Connor will come back. They've seen it. When he does, tell him the circle must be completed. The notebook contained detailed maps of areas I'd never seen before, despite knowing every trail, every creek, every deer path in my sector. Coordinates led to places that didn't match our GPS systems, landmarks that existed in some twisted mirror version of the forest I'd protected for nearly 2 decades, and in the margins, phone numbers written in Jessica's careful academic script, numbers that, when I called them from my truck that first night back, were answered by voices that whispered my full name, my badge number, and the names of my wife and daughters before hanging up. I parked my Ford Ranger at the Timber Creek trailhead at 5:47 a.m., the same spot where Jessica had left her Honda Civic all those months ago. October frost coated my windshield like skeletal fingers, and my breath clouded in air that tasted wrong, metallic with an underlying sweetness that reminded me of roadkill left too long in summer heat. My radio crackled with the usual morning check-ins from other rangers, their voices a comforting reminder of the normal world I was about to leave behind. Unit 47, this is base. Connor, you sure you want to work that sector solo today? Sarah Martinez's voice carried genuine concern. She'd been working dispatch for 12 years and had never questioned my judgment before. The fact that she was asking made something twist in my gut, but I pressed the transmit button with steady fingers. Copy that, base. Just following up on some old business. Nothing I can't handle. But even as I said it, I felt watched. Not by animals. I knew that feeling. The weight of predator eyes tracking movement, calculating distance. This was different. Intelligent. Patient. Like something that had been waiting for me specifically. Something that knew I would eventually come back because I was too stubborn and too proud to leave a case unsolved. My gear felt heavier than usual as I shouldered my pack. GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency beacon, 2 days worth of MREs, water purification tablets, my grandfather's compass that never failed me, and my service pistol loaded with hollow points that I prayed would be enough for whatever I might face. The familiar weight should have been comforting, but today it felt like carrying my own coffin. The trail started normal enough, packed earth worn smooth by thousands of hiking boots, trail markers every quarter mile, familiar Douglas firs towering overhead like silent guardians. But within the first hour, I noticed things that made the hair on my arm stand up. Carvings in trees that hadn't been there 6 months ago, symbols that hurt to look at directly, as if my brain refused to process their meaning. Bird calls that didn't match any species native to the Cascades, haunting melodies that seemed to echo from too many directions at once. By 9:30 a.m., my iPhone showed no signal bars, which wasn't unusual this deep in the forest. But when I checked my GPS, the coordinates flickered and shifted, showing my location as places that couldn't exist. Negative elevations, impossible latitudes, coordinates that placed me simultaneously in Washington state, and locations that didn't appear on any map. I switched to my backup GPS unit, but it displayed the same impossible readings, its screen occasionally flashing messages like, "Welcome home, Connor," and "She's waiting," in pixelated text that shouldn't have been possible on a device with no internet connection. The trail to Jessica's last known position should have taken 90 minutes. I'd hiked it dozens of times during the original search, could walk it blindfolded. But today, familiar landmarks appeared in wrong places. The lightning split cedar that should mark the halfway point showed up after 20 minutes, then again after another hour, identical down to the char patterns on its bark. Stream crossings I remembered as simple rock hops had become rushing torrents that forced detours through undergrowth so thick it seemed designed to funnel me toward specific paths. Every few minutes my radio would crackle with voices that weren't from base station, conversations between people who spoke in whispers, discussing things that made my skin crawl. The Bryan bloodline has always been strong. His great-grandfather built the first ranger station on cursed ground. 4 generations of protectors, all leading to this moment. When I tried to respond, demanding identification, the voices would dissolve into static that formed patterns, long hisses and sharp crackles that sounded almost like words in a language I didn't recognize but somehow understood meant soon and ready and chosen. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Connor's situation? Comment below. By noon, I reached the clearing where Jessica had vanished. The crime scene tape was long gone, but I could see the spot where her backpack had been found, where her footprints had simply stopped, like she'd been plucked from the earth by invisible hands. Today, though, the clearing wasn't empty. 7 people stood in perfect formation around the perimeter, each wearing modern hiking clothes but standing with an unnatural stillness that made them look like mannequins positioned by a disturbed artist. They faced inward toward the center of the clearing, where Jessica Chen sat cross-legged on the forest floor. She looked exactly as she had in the missing person photos: shoulder-length black hair, Berkeley sweatshirt, hiking boots caked with trail dirt. Except her eyes. Her eyes held an intelligence that was vast and hungry and utterly inhuman. When she smiled at me, her teeth were too white, too sharp, too numerous for a human mouth. "Hello, Connor," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the trees themselves. "We've been waiting for you to come home." The 7 figures turned toward me in perfect unison, their faces identical masks of serene contentment that made my blood freeze. I recognized them, missing persons from files dating back years. Hikers who'd vanished from different trails, different seasons, different states, all officially unsolved cases. All standing here now, staring at me with the same inhuman intelligence burning behind their eyes. My hand moved instinctively to my sidearm, but Jessica laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of children's bones. "Guns won't help you here, Ranger Bryan. This isn't that kind of story." She gestured to the 7 figures. "Ask them. They all tried violence first. Now they understand better ways." One of the figures stepped forward, a middle-aged man I recognized from a missing hiker report from 2015. When he spoke, his voice was his own, but the words belonged to something else. "Connor Bryan, son of Robert Bryan, grandson of James Bryan, great-grandson of William Bryan, who built the first ranger station in 1892 on sacred ground where 7 tribes once performed their most powerful rituals. 4 generations of rangers all protecting the forest, never knowing they were protecting something that was protecting them in return." The knowledge hit me like physical blows. My family's history with these mountains went deeper than I'd ever imagined. The ranger station where I'd worked for 18 years, where my father had worked before me, where his father and great-grandfather had served, all built on ground that had been sacred long before white men ever saw the Pacific Northwest. And we hadn't been protecting the forest from people. We'd been protecting people from what lived in the forest. The old agreements are ending, Jessica continued, rising to her feet with movements too fluid for human joints. 7 generations ago, your great-great-grandfather made a bargain. Rangers would serve as guardians, keeping people away from our sacred places, and we would sleep. But he promised something else, that when the appointed time came, the bloodline would provide one final service. The 7 figures began to move, walking in a slow circle around the clearing. With each step, the air grew thicker, charged with energy that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. I tried to key my radio to call for backup, but the device crumbled to plastic powder in my hands. My GPS units died with electronic wheezes. Even my grandfather's compass spun wildly before its needle snapped off entirely. "You feel it, don't you?" Jessica asked, stepping closer. "The call in your blood. The reason you became a ranger like your father, like his father before him. The reason you could never leave these mountains even when city jobs paid better. The reason you came back today, even knowing it was dangerous." She was right, and the admission terrified me more than her inhuman appearance. I'd always felt drawn to these forests, had always known which trails were safe and which ones whispered warnings to avoid. I'd attributed it to experience, to intuition born from years in the wilderness, but now I understood it was something deeper, something that had been bred into my bloodline for over a century. "What do you want?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Completion," she said simply. "Your great-great-grandfather promised that when we needed to wake, when the old powers needed to return to the world, his bloodline would provide a willing guardian for the transition. Someone who knew the forest, who loved it enough to ensure the old ways were preserved." The circling figures had created a perfect ring around us now, their feet wearing a groove in the earth that began to glow with sickly phosphorescence. I could feel power building, ancient energies that predated Christianity, predated civilization, predated humanity itself. These weren't just cultists playing with occult symbolism. They were vessels for something that had been old when the first trees took root in these mountains. "And if I refuse?" Jessica's smile widened beyond anatomical possibility. "Then Jessica Chen really dies, along with all the others we've collected over the years. Hikers, campers, researchers, anyone who stumbled too close to our resting places. They're all still alive, Connor, kept in a state between waking and sleeping while we decided whether humanity could be trusted with our return. Your choice will determine their fate." Behind her, the forest itself seemed to be watching. Trees leaned inward, their branches forming cathedral arches overhead. The very air pulsed with heartbeats that weren't my own. I realized that the thing wearing Jessica's face wasn't lying. Somewhere in this twisted realm between the normal world and whatever lay beneath, dozens of missing persons were waiting for me to decide their fate. But there was something else. Something that my 18 years of ranger experience told me, even as my mind reeled from supernatural revelation. The way Jessica moved, the way the 7 figures coordinated their actions. This wasn't random. This was a performance, a carefully orchestrated ritual designed to make me feel like I had no choice. And in my experience, when someone worked that hard to convince you there was only one option, they were usually desperate. "You made one mistake," I said, backing toward the tree line while keeping my eyes locked on Jessica's impossible face. "You assumed I'd be afraid." I pulled out my emergency flare gun and fired it directly into the center of the glowing circle. The magnesium burned through whatever supernatural energy they'd been building, and their perfect formation collapsed as the 7 figures scattered with shrieks that sounded like tearing metal. Jessica's serene expression twisted into something primal and furious, and for just a moment, I saw what was really wearing her face. Something with too many teeth and eyes like burning coals. "You can't run from destiny, Connor Bryan," she screamed as I crashed through the underbrush. "Your bloodline owes a debt." But I was already gone, using every skill my father and grandfather had taught me about moving fast through dense forest. Behind me, inhuman voices rose in harmony, chanting words that made the trees bleed sap and caused flowers to wither as I passed. The forest itself turned against me. Roots rose to trip me. Branches swung down like clubs. Thorns grew inches longer in seconds to tear at my clothes and skin. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning and my heart hammering against my ribs. The normal landmarks were still wrong, still impossibly displaced, but I followed water downhill and trusted my blood-deep knowledge of these mountains to guide me toward civilization. Behind me, the chanting grew louder, joined by voices I recognized. Jessica, the Seven Figures, and dozens of others, all calling my name with increasing desperation. When I finally stumbled out of the tree line at Timber Creek Trailhead, my truck was surrounded by police cars and search and rescue vehicles. According to the rangers who found me, I'd been missing for 3 days, though my watch showed only 8 hours had passed. My radio equipment was found scattered along the trail I'd taken, melted into unrecognizable slag. My grandfather's compass was discovered buried beneath 6 inches of soil, its face cracked and blackened as if struck by lightning. But here's what really kept me awake for the next 6 months. When they searched the clearing where I claimed to have found Jessica and the Seven Figures, the ground showed clear signs of recent excavation. 7 graves, arranged in a perfect circle, each containing remains that matched missing persons dating back decades. At the center of the circle, they found Jessica Chen's body, decomposed exactly as much as would be expected after 6 months in the forest. The notebook that had brought me back was never located. Mrs. Chen swears she never called me. There's no record of our conversation in my phone logs. According to every official investigation, I suffered some kind of psychological break brought on by guilt over Jessica's unsolved disappearance and invented the entire experience. But I know what I saw. I know what those things wanted from me. And I know they're still out there, still waiting, still patient as only immortal things can be patient. Because 3 weeks ago, I found a new notebook on my truck's dashboard when I finished my shift. My handwriting, but not my words. Day 1, the old agreements are ending. New bargains must be made. Day 7, Connor understands now. The bloodline remembers what the mind forgets. Day 19, tomorrow he brings his daughter to see the forest. The cycle continues. I never wrote those words. But my 8-year-old daughter Emma has been asking to go camping, and every instinct bred into 4 generations of Bryan men tells me to take her into those mountains, to show her the secret places, to begin teaching her the old responsibilities. The worst part isn't that I'm terrified of what might happen if I do. The worst part is that I'm terrified of what might happen if I don't. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Jessica Chen. I read every single one. My name is Jake Sullivan, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life forever. Unit 23, we have a code yellow. 20-year-old female, Madison Taylor, reported missing by family. Last seen yesterday evening, 1900 hours, North Ridge Trail, Yellowstone Sector 7G. Families requesting immediate search and rescue. I spit my coffee back into the thermos, the bitter liquid suddenly tasting like ash. 20 years on the job and missing persons cases still made my stomach clench. Not because I believed in any of that supernatural bullshit the old-timers whispered about around the station. Ghosts, cursed trails, spirits of dead rangers. Pure fucking nonsense. I was a realist. People got lost because they were unprepared, inexperienced, or just plain stupid. Madison Taylor was probably huddled somewhere with a sprained ankle, waiting for rescue. Copy that, dispatch. Jake Sullivan responding. ETA to Northridge, 15 minutes. I grab my pack, fully loaded with GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency shelter, flares, and enough gear to survive 3 days if needed. My Motorola radio was clipped to my shoulder, fully charged. The October morning air cut through my uniform like razors, and frost crunched under my Danner boots as I headed to the trailhead. The coordinates led me to 44 to 27, 42, 5N, 110 to 49, 17, 3W, Northridge Trail, a moderately difficult 2-mile loop that climbed 2,400 feet through dense lodgepole pine forest. I'd hiked it hundreds of times. Standard search protocol. establish last known position, conduct expanding grid search, document all sign. Madison's parents, the Taylors, were waiting at the trailhead parking lot in their Honda Pilot, eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Her mother clutched a photo, blonde 20-year-old with bright green eyes, wearing a red Columbia jacket and North Face backpack. She's studying biology at Montana State, Mrs. Taylor sobbed. She knows the outdoors. She wouldn't just disappear. That word hung in the air like a curse. I'd heard it too many times before. Ma'am, I'm going to find your daughter. Madison's probably just off trail somewhere, maybe injured, unable to signal. We'll have her back to you soon. Empty promises. I'd made them before. I started at her last known position, mile marker 3.2, where the trail forked toward Cascade Falls. The morning sun filtered through pine needles, casting everything in amber light. I could smell wet earth, decomposing leaves, and the sharp scent of pine sap. My boots left clear impressions in the muddy trail as I began sign cutting, looking for any trace of Madison's passage. That's when I found her first footprint. Size 7 hiking boot, Merrill brand, pressed deep into soft soil beside the main trail. The tread pattern matched the photo her parents had shown me of her gear, but something was wrong with the print. It was pointing toward an unmarked side trail I'd never noticed before, a narrow deer path that disappeared into thick timber. My GPS showed nothing. According to every map I'd studied for 2 decades, this trail didn't exist. Unit 23 to dispatch, I'm following sign-off established trail. GPS coordinates. I checked my Garmin unit. The screen flickered, showing error messages. Dispatch, my GPS is malfunctioning. Switching to compass navigation. Static answered me. I examined my radio. Full battery, clear reception that morning. Now nothing but white noise. The metallic taste of fear crept into my mouth, but I pushed it down. Equipment fails. Shit happens. I had a job to do. Madison's boot prints continued down the mystery trail, clear as day in the soft earth. Broken twigs at shoulder height showed her passage. Standard tracking. Nothing supernatural about it. I followed, marking my route with orange flagging tape every 50 yards. The forest grew darker as I descended into a hollow I'd never seen before. The temperature dropped 15 degrees and my breath began misting. Pine branches pressed closer, scratching my face and catching my pack. The silence was absolute. No bird song, no insect buzz, no wind through the trees. Just my footsteps and the hammering of my heart. After 2 hours, I found Madison's backpack. It was hanging from a tree branch exactly at eye level, as if someone had carefully placed it there. No scuff marks, no tears. The zippers were closed, contents undisturbed. Her wallet, water bottles, energy bars, even her iPhone. Everything was there. The phone showed no signal, battery at 23%. That's when the first wave of wrongness hit me. The trees around the backpack were wrong. I'd been hiking this area for 20 years, knew every species of plant and tree. These weren't lodgepole pines anymore. The bark was smooth, almost black, and when I touched one, it felt warm, like skin. My vision blurred for a second and I stumbled backward. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, joined by nausea that made my stomach contract violently. I dry heaved twice before regaining control. "Get your shit together, Sullivan," I muttered. Altitude sickness, maybe. Dehydration. Rational explanations. But Madison's trail continued deeper into the forest. I should have turned back. Every instinct screamed at me to retreat, call for backup, wait for better equipment. Instead, I pushed forward. Mrs. Taylor's broken voice echoed in my head. She wouldn't just disappear. The trail led to a clearing I'd never seen on any survey map. In the center stood the ruins of an old ranger station. Weathered logs, collapsed roof, broken windows like dead eyes. Vines and moss covered everything, but I could make out a faded sign. Yellowstone National Park, Ranger Station 7, Esther, 1952. Impossible. I knew the history of every structure in this sector. No ranger station had ever been built here. Madison's boot prints led directly to the ruined building's front door. As I approached, that wrongness sensation intensified. The air felt thick, almost liquid. My ears popped repeatedly, and a high-pitched whine filled my head. The temperature plummeted another 10 degrees and frost began forming on my gear. The door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see footprints in the dust inside. Madison's Merrill treads, clear and fresh. I drew my mag light and pushed the door open. The beam of light revealed a single room, empty except for a metal desk covered in decades of dust and decay. Madison's footprints crossed to the center of the room and simply stopped, as if she'd vanished into thin air. But on the desk lay an old leather logbook, open to a page dated October 15th, 1987. Final entry, Ranger Thomas McKay. Something is wrong with the North Ridge Trail. Hikers keep disappearing. 7 missing in the past month. I found evidence of an unmarked trail that doesn't appear on any map. Today I'm going to follow it to its end. If anyone finds this, do not follow the trail. There's something in these woods that shouldn't exist. It calls to people, draws them away from the main trail. I can hear it calling to me now. God help me, I can't resist. The entry ended in a dark stain that looked disturbingly like dried blood. That's when I heard Madison's voice. Jake? Jake, I'm here. I need help. The voice came from deeper in the forest beyond the ranger station. Weak, frightened, completely recognizable from the voicemail her mother had played for me that morning. Relief flooded through me. She was alive. I crashed through the underbrush toward her voice, abandoning all caution. 20 yards from the station, I found another trail marker. An old wooden sign, rotted and barely legible. North Ridge Extension, 2.3 miles. Madison's voice called again. Jake, please, I'm hurt. I can't move. The trail stretched ahead, perfectly maintained despite being absent from every map. Someone had recently cleared the brush, repaired the wooden bridges, even installed new mile markers. But the construction style looked decades old, like it had been frozen in time. As I hiked deeper, my equipment began failing systematically. First, my compass started spinning wildly. Then my watch stopped at 11:47 a.m. My flashlight dimmed despite fresh batteries. Even my emergency whistle produced no sound when I tried to blow it. But Madison kept calling, always just ahead, always out of sight. Jake, I can see you. Keep coming, I'm right here. The trail began to loop back on itself in impossible ways. I'd marked trees with my knife only to pass the same marks minutes later from a different direction. The sun never moved from its position overhead, trapped at 11:47 a.m. according to my frozen watch. That's when I started seeing the other hikers. First, just glimpses from the corner of my eye. A flash of red jacket, a figure disappearing around a bend. But as I continued, they became more solid. A bearded man in 1980s hiking gear, staring at me from beside the trail before melting back into the trees. A woman in modern REI clothing, walking ahead of me but never getting closer despite my increased pace. All of them had the same expression, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in silent screams. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Jake Sullivan's situation? Comment below. The trail led to a second clearing, this one containing something that shattered my rational worldview forever. It was Ranger Thomas McKay, or what was left of him. He sat behind a makeshift desk made from fallen logs, wearing the tattered remains of a 1987 Park Service uniform. His skin had the waxy, preserved appearance of a mummy, but his eyes were horribly alive, bright, aware, and filled with an eternity of suffering. When he saw me, his mouth opened in a soundless scream that lasted 30 seconds. Then he spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Welcome to the North Ridge Extension, Ranger Sullivan. I've been waiting for you. My legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees, vomiting violently until nothing came up but bile and terror. This couldn't be real. Hallucination brought on by altitude, dehydration, stress. I was a rational man. I didn't believe in... Oh, you believe now, McKay whispered, reading my thoughts. You have to believe, because you can never leave. He gestured to the forest around us. Dozens of figures emerged from between the trees, hikers from different decades, all wearing the clothes they'd died in, all with that same expression of eternal terror. Men, women, children. Some looked fresh, others were barely more than animated skeletons. Every person who's ever disappeared on North Ridge Trail, McKay explained. They all found their way here eventually. The trail calls to them, you see, draws them away from safety, and once you're here, you serve the trail. You help it call others. Madison stepped out from behind a pine tree. But it wasn't Madison. Not anymore. Her green eyes had turned black, empty as holes in space. Her blonde hair hung in stringy, wet clumps. Her red Columbia jacket was shredded and stained with something dark. When she smiled, her teeth were broken, jagged things that didn't belong in a human mouth. "Thanks for coming to save me, Jake," she said in a voice like grinding bones. "Now you can stay forever." The other hikers began closing in, their movements jerky and unnatural. I scrambled backward, pulling my emergency flare gun from my pack. The red phosphorus burned bright as daylight when I fired it, and the creatures shrieked in unison, a sound like metal tearing. They recoiled from the light, giving me precious seconds to run. I crashed through the forest, abandoning the trail entirely. Branches tore at my face and clothes. My lungs burned with each desperate breath. Behind me, the inhuman screams grew louder, closer. But something had changed inside me during that encounter. The rational, skeptical part of my mind, the part that had defined Jake Sullivan for 43 years, was gone, replaced by something primal and desperate. I wasn't just running from supernatural creatures. I was running toward something. My daughter Emma's face flashed in my mind. 7 years old, gap-toothed smile, always asking when Daddy would come home from work. My wife Sarah making coffee in our kitchen that morning, kissing my forehead and saying, "Be safe out there." Love. Pure, desperate, irrational love. And somehow that love gave me power. I could sense the real trail now, not with my equipment or my training, but with something deeper. The forest itself was trying to help me escape, showing me glimpses of authentic sunlight through the canopy, guiding my feet to solid ground. The creatures behind me screamed louder, their pursuit becoming frantic. They knew I was escaping their trap. I burst through a wall of pine boughs and found myself back on the real North Ridge Trail, exactly at mile marker 3.2, where I'd started following Madison's false tracks. My GPS flickered back to life, my radio crackled with dispatch calling my unit number, and my watch resumed ticking, 4:47 p.m. I'd been lost for 5 hours that felt like eternity, but I wasn't alone. The real Madison Taylor sat beside the trail, conscious and unharmed, wearing her red Columbia jacket and looking confused but healthy. She'd been there the entire time, nursing a sprained ankle from slipping off trail the previous evening. "Are you the ranger?" she asked weakly. "I've been waiting for help. I thought I heard voices calling me deeper into the forest, but something told me to stay put." I stared at her, then at the forest where I'd just escaped. No unmarked trail was visible, no deer path leading to impossible places, just ordinary wilderness. But in my pocket I found a piece of evidence that proved the supernatural encounter had been real. Thomas McKay's ranger badge from 1987, tarnished with age and stained with something that looked like blood. As I helped Madison limp back to the trailhead, she told me about the voices she'd heard, multiple people calling her name, trying to convince her to follow them deeper into the forest. She'd resisted because her father had taught her to never leave a trail when lost. That resistance had saved her life. We reached the parking lot just as the sun set behind the mountains. Mrs. Taylor collapsed in tears, holding her daughter like she'd never let go. I watched their reunion and felt something shift inside me. The cynical, skeptical Jake Sullivan was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood that love was the only force powerful enough to stand against the darkness. But as I drove home that night, I kept checking my rearview mirror. Because I knew the truth now. The North Ridge extension was still out there, waiting. And somewhere in those cursed woods, Ranger Thomas McKay continued his eternal duty, helping the trail call to new victims. I never told anyone the full truth about what happened that day. How could I? But I did something else. I started believing the old-timers' stories about supernatural dangers in the wilderness. And I began warning other rangers in subtle ways about certain trails that seemed to call to lost hikers. Because now I knew. There are some things in the wilderness that are worse than being lost. Some things that are hungry for souls. And some trails that are designed to never let you find your way home. The last entry in my logbook for October 15th, 2018 reads simply, Madison Taylor found safe. Recommended trail closure for North Ridge Sector 7G pending further investigation. But investigation was impossible. When I returned the next day with backup rangers and surveying equipment, we found no trace of the unmarked trail, the ruined ranger station, or any evidence of supernatural activity. Just ordinary forest. Thomas McKay's badge disappeared from my evidence locker that same night. In its place, I found a handwritten note. Thank you for not bringing others. The trail has enough servants. TM. I kept that note for 3 years before burning it, but I still remember every word. And sometimes, late at night when I'm patrolling remote trails, I hear voices calling from the darkness. Friendly, helpful voices offering to show me shortcuts back to civilization. I never follow them, because I know where those shortcuts lead. And I've seen what's waiting at the end of the trail. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Madison Taylor. I read every single one. My name is David Sullivan, and I should have forgotten Megan Elizabeth Clark's case, but something brought me back to that cursed forest. It was October 15th, 2019, 6 months after I'd been officially reassigned from the case. 6 months since Chief Martinez had pulled me into his cramped office at Olympic National Forest headquarters and told me, in his gravelly voice that still haunted my dreams, Sullivan, you're too green for this. Let the veterans handle Clark from here. But Megan Elizabeth Clark wouldn't let me forget her. Every morning when I shaved, I saw her face in the bathroom mirror behind my reflection. 18 years old with auburn hair and freckles scattered across her cheeks like constellations. Every time my Nokia smartphone buzzed with a text, my heart hammered against my ribs because for a split second, I thought it might be her family asking if I had any news. Every time I laced up my Merrill hiking boots, the leather creak sounded like her voice calling for help from somewhere deep in the Hoh rainforest. The case had started simple enough. March 22nd, 2019, my 3rd week as a forest ranger. Megan Elizabeth Clark, freshman at University of Washington, had come to Olympic National Forest for a solo photography project. Her Instagram showed her setting up camp at Solduke Hot Springs, smiling beneath towering Douglas firs, her Nikon D3500 hanging around her neck like a promise of artistic dreams fulfilled. She was supposed to check in with her parents every evening at 7 p.m. sharp. Helen Clark had been adamant about that when she'd called our station before her daughter's trip. Megan's responsible, her mother had said, and I could hear the love wrapped around every syllable. She'll call. She always calls. But March 24th came and went. No call, no text, no social media updates. I'd been assigned as the rookie on the search team, fumbling with GPS coordinates and mispronouncing trail names while veteran rangers like Morrison and Torres exchanged knowing looks. We'd found her campsite on the 3rd day. Tent still zipped shut, sleeping bag undisturbed, Nikon camera sitting on a log with its memory card missing. But we'd also found something else, something the veterans had whispered about in hushed tones when they thought I wasn't listening. Deep in the forest, following a barely visible deer path that led away from any official trail, we'd discovered an abandoned church, St. Bartholomew's Chapel, according to the rusted sign hanging askew by its door. Built in 1943 by a logging community that had long since disappeared into Pacific Northwest mythology, the structure leaned against a massive cedar tree like a drunk seeking support, its white paint peeling away in leprous patches to reveal black wood underneath. But it was the smell that had stopped us cold. Even now, 6 months later, that scent clung to my nostrils like cigarette smoke on clothing, something between rotting flowers and burning hair, sweet and acrid at the same time. Morrison had taken one whiff and immediately radioed for backup. Torres had crossed himself and muttered something in Spanish that sounded like a prayer. "Rookie, you stay here with the campsite," Morrison had ordered, but his voice shook in a way that didn't match his 20-year veteran status. "We'll check the church." They'd been gone for 3 hours. When they returned, Morrison's face had been pale as old bone, and Torres kept looking over his shoulder like something was following him. They'd filed their report as structure searched, no evidence of missing person. But that night at the ranger station, I'd overheard Morrison on the phone with his wife. "I don't care if it sounds crazy, Linda," he'd whispered. "There's something wrong with that place, something that ain't natural." The official search had been called off after 2 weeks. No body, no evidence, no leads. Megan Elizabeth Clark had simply vanished into the Olympic forest like morning mist. Chief Martinez had transferred me to trail maintenance, better suited for your experience level, he'd said, and assigned the cold case to veteran investigators. But the church wouldn't leave my thoughts. Every night, I found myself studying topographical maps of the Hoh rainforest, tracing the deer path we'd followed with my finger. Every day off, I drove my beat-up Honda Civic to the forest edge and stared into those dark trees, feeling something pull at me like a fishhook in my chest. 6 months later, Helen Clark's phone call had changed everything. "David?" Her voice had been barely a whisper through my cell phone's tinny speaker. "David, I know you're not officially on Megan's case anymore, but I need you to listen to me." My hands had started shaking before she even continued. I was sitting in my studio apartment in Port Angeles, eating leftover pizza and watching Netflix, trying to forget about missing girls and abandoned churches. "I found something," Helen had said, "in Megan's old room, hidden under her mattress. David, it's a photograph of that church." My pizza had turned to ash in my mouth. "Mrs. Clark, that's impossible. We never released any photos of—" "The timestamp says March 21st, David. The day before she left for her trip, she knew about that church before she ever set foot in the forest. The timestamp, March 21st, 2019. One day before Megan Elizabeth Clark had packed her Subaru Outback and driven to Olympic National Forest for what her family thought was a spontaneous photography adventure. But it hadn't been spontaneous at all. That's what brought me back to the cursed forest on October 15th, 2019. Not official duty or veteran backup or proper protocol. Just me, my rookie instincts, and the growing certainty that Megan Elizabeth Clark had gone into those woods looking for something specific, something that had been waiting for her. I parked my Honda at the Sol Duke trailhead at 5:47 a.m. before dawn could burn away the shadows that made the forest honest. My breath fogged in the October cold as I shouldered my day pack, water bottles, energy bars, first aid kit, emergency whistle, and my department-issued Motorola radio that would probably lose signal the moment I stepped off the main trail. My smartphone showed 3 bars, but I knew that wouldn't last. The Hoh rainforest swallowed cell signals like quicksand swallowed footsteps. The official trails were well maintained and clearly marked, with those familiar brown signs pointing towards Sol Duke Falls and Lover's Lane Loop. But I wasn't following official trails. I was retracing that deer path Morrison and Torres had found 6 months ago, the one that led away from human civilization and toward something that veterans wouldn't talk about except in whispers. The forest felt different as I walked deeper into its embrace. The Douglas firs and western hemlock stretched up into a canopy so thick that even full daylight became a greenish twilight. Every footstep on the moss-covered trail sounded like a gunshot in the cathedral silence. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no insect hum. Just the sound of my own breathing and the occasional crack of a branch that might have been the wind, or might not have been. 20 minutes in, my GPS started acting strange. The little blue dot representing my location began jumping around the screen like a trapped insect, showing me in 3 different places at once. My altitude readings fluctuated between 1,200 feet and 3,147 feet and back again, even though I was walking on relatively level ground. 40 minutes in, my radio crackled with static. "Unit 23, what's your 20? The voice was fuzzy and distant, barely recognizable as Chief Martinez. I thumbed the transmission button. Chief, this is Sullivan. I'm following up on some new evidence in the Clark case. Currently about 2 miles southeast of Saul Duke, heading toward... Sullivan? What the hell are you... Bzzzt. Not authorized for... Bzzzt. Report back to... The radio died with the electronic wheeze. Great. 6 months as a forest ranger, and I was already going rogue on what might be the most important case of my career. My parents hadn't raised me to be a cowboy, but they'd raised me to finish what I started. And I'd started looking for Megan Elizabeth Clark. The deer path grew narrower as I followed it deeper into the forest. What had been a clear trail worn by countless hooves became a barely visible depression in the moss, marked only by broken ferns and the occasional scuff mark on a tree trunk. I had to stop every few minutes to check my compass, making sure I was still heading roughly southeast toward the coordinates I'd memorized from our original search. But the forest seemed to be shifting around me. Trees I was certain I'd passed before appeared ahead of me again, like the forest was rotating slowly while I walked. A fallen log with a distinctive split down its middle showed up on my left, then later on my right. Then, impossibly ahead of me, blocking the path, my compass needle began spinning lazily in circles instead of pointing north, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the span of 5 minutes. That's when I started to smell it. Rotting flowers and burning hair. The same scent that had stopped Morrison and Torres cold 6 months ago. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in David Sullivan's situation? Comment below. The smell grew stronger as I pushed through a curtain of hanging moss and found myself in a clearing I remembered from my nightmares. St. Bartholomew's Chapel sat exactly where we'd left it, leaning against its ancient cedar like a dying man against a hospital wall. But something had changed in the 6 months since our search. The white paint had continued peeling away, revealing more of the black wood underneath, and now the building looked less like a church and more like a wound in the forest's flesh. The front door, which had been securely closed during our original search, now hung open like a slack mouth. And there was light coming from inside. Not electric light. Nothing in this deep forest had seen electricity since the logging camps closed in the 1950s. This was flickering, orange light that danced and wavered like candle flames or firelight. But it was 11:30 a.m. on a clear October morning. Why would there be any light inside an abandoned church? Unless someone was in there. Unless Megan Elizabeth Clark was in there. My heart hammered against my ribs as I approached the church. Each footstep on the forest floor sounded like thunder, and I was convinced that whoever or whatever was inside could hear me coming. But I couldn't stop. Not when I was this close to answers. The wooden steps leading to the church door sagged under my weight, creaking like the hull of a sinking ship. Up close, I could see that the black wood beneath the peeling paint wasn't weathered or stained. It was burned, charred from some long-ago fire that had left the church's bones exposed, but somehow hadn't destroyed the structure. The smell of rotting flowers and burning hair was overwhelming now, making my eyes water and my stomach clench. But beneath it, I caught another scent that made my blood freeze in my veins. Copper, metallic and fresh. The smell of blood. I drew my service flashlight with shaking hands, even though the strange orange light from inside should have been enough to see by. The beam cut through the morning shadows and illuminated the church's interior, revealing something that violated every natural law I understood. The inside of St. Bartholomew's Chapel was impossibly vast. From the outside, the structure was maybe 30 feet long and 20 feet wide, a small country church built for a small logging community. But stepping through that open doorway was like entering a cathedral. The ceiling soared up into darkness beyond my flashlight's reach, supported by stone columns that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Rows of wooden pews stretched away from the entrance, disappearing into shadows that my light couldn't penetrate. And at the far end of this impossible space where the altar should have been, candles burned in iron sconces mounted on walls that were definitely not made of wood. The walls were made of bone, human skulls mortared together with what looked like black tar, empty eye sockets staring down at rows of pews filled with motionless figures. My flashlight beam swept across the congregation and I saw faces pale as mushrooms, heads tilted at unnatural angles, mouths hanging open as if frozen mid-scream. But they weren't dead. Their eyes followed my light as it moved across them. "Welcome, David Sullivan," said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "We've been waiting for you." I spun toward the sound, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across bone walls and impossible architecture. Behind me, the church door swung shut with a sound like a coffin closing. "Who's there?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. "Where's Megan Elizabeth Clark?" Laughter echoed through the vast space, but it wasn't coming from any of the motionless figures in the pews. It was coming from the walls themselves, from the bone and mortar and whatever dark force had transformed a simple country church into this nightmare cathedral. "Megan Elizabeth Clark," the voice repeated, tasting each syllable like wine. "She came to us willingly, you know, drawn by dreams and whispers and the promise of photographs that would make her famous. She knew about us before she ever set foot in your precious forest." A figure detached itself from the shadows near the bone altar. At first glance, it looked like a man in a black suit, tall and gaunt with pale hands clasped behind his back. But as he walked closer, I saw that his face was wrong. The features shifted constantly. Sometimes young, sometimes old, sometimes not quite human at all. "You see, young ranger, this place existed long before your logging camps and hiking trails, long before your Olympic National Forest was even a dream in some bureaucrat's mind. This is sacred ground, sacred to powers that your modern world has forgotten." My hand fumbled for my radio, but I already knew it wouldn't work. Nothing worked properly in this place. The laws of physics seemed as optional as speed limits on empty highways. "The photograph Helen Clark found," I managed to say. "How did Megan have it before she came here?" The figure smiled, and for a moment its face stabilized into something almost human, almost familiar. "Because she'd been here before, David. In dreams, in visions, called by the same force that brought you back today." He gestured to the congregation of pale, motionless figures in the pews. "They all came willingly eventually, drawn by curiosity, by artistic ambition, by the promise of experiencing something beyond the mundane world of trail maps and camping permits. That's when I recognized some of the faces in the pews. Morrison, Torres, other rangers I'd worked with over the past 6 months. All sitting perfectly still, eyes open and aware, but their bodies as motionless as mannequins. "You see, this church feeds on those who are meant to protect the forest," the figure explained. "Park rangers, Forest Service personnel, search and rescue volunteers, people whose job it is to find the lost and guide them to safety. There's something delicious about corrupting that purpose." I backed toward where the door should have been, but my shoulders hit solid stone wall instead of wood. When I turned, my flashlight revealed more bone mortared with black tar, more empty eye sockets watching my growing panic with dead amusement. "The door was never real, David. None of this is real in the way your textbooks define reality. This place exists between spaces, in the gaps where your rational mind can't quite make sense of what it's experiencing." My breathing was coming in short gasps now, and black spots danced at the edges of my vision. The air in this impossible cathedral felt thick and oily, coating my lungs like smoke from a grease fire. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's Megan Elizabeth Clark?" The figure's smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp and too numerous for any human mouth. "She's everywhere, David, and nowhere. She became part of this place the moment she stepped through that door 6 months ago, just as you're becoming part of it now." I felt something change in my body, a numbness starting in my fingertips and spreading up my arms. My legs grew heavy, and I found myself sinking onto one of the wooden pews without consciously deciding to sit. Around me, the pale congregation turned their heads in perfect unison, all of them looking directly at me with expressions of terrible understanding. "You feel it beginning, don't you?" the figure said. "The dissolution of your individual will. Soon you'll understand what Megan learned in her final moments, that some mysteries are meant to consume those who try to solve them." But as the numbness spread through my body and my conscious thoughts began to blur at the edges, I remembered something. Something Helen Clark had said during her desperate phone call that had brought me back to this cursed forest. I found something, hidden under her mattress. Not just the photograph, something else. With tremendous effort, fighting against the supernatural paralysis creeping through my nervous system. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the item Helen Clark had pressed into my hands when I'd visited her house the night before. A small wooden cross, simple and unadorned, carved from what looked like cedar wood, the kind of thing a girl might have made in summer camp or church youth group. The moment my fingers closed around it, the impossible cathedral flickered like a television with bad reception. The figure in the black suit hissed and stepped backward, its constantly shifting face settling into an expression of surprise and anger. "That won't save you," it snarled. "Faith is just another word for self-deception. There is no power in that trinket beyond what your primitive mind assigns to it." But the wooden cross was warming in my hand, and the warmth was spreading up my arm, pushing back the supernatural numbness that had been claiming my body. More importantly, the cathedral around me was becoming unstable. The bone walls flickered between stone and wood and back again. The impossible vastness of the interior contracted and expanded like a breathing lung. "Megan carved this herself," I said, my voice growing stronger. Her mother said she'd been working on it for weeks before her trip. Said Megan told her it was for protection. The figure's form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. Impossible. She came to us willingly. She was drawn by our power, our promise of transcendence beyond mortal limitations. But even as it spoke, I could see doubt creeping into its inhuman features, because I understood now what Helen Clark had realized when she'd found the cross hidden under her daughter's mattress. Megan Elizabeth Clark hadn't come to Olympic National Forest seeking supernatural experiences or artistic inspiration. She'd come here to fight something that had been calling to her in dreams and visions. The photograph hadn't been evidence of willing participation. It had been reconnaissance, intelligence gathering. She'd carved the cross as protection and hidden it from whatever force had been influencing her thoughts, knowing that she might need to leave something behind for whoever came looking for her. "She fought you," I said, standing up from the pew as feeling returned to my legs. "That's why you couldn't fully claim her. That's why there's still something of her left to save." The cathedral shuddered around us, and cracks appeared in the bone walls. Through the gaps I caught glimpses of the real St. Bartholomew's Chapel. Small, wooden, abandoned but not supernatural. The figure in the black suit was fading now, becoming more shadow than substance. "You understand nothing, Rookie Ranger. This place has existed for centuries. One girl's primitive faith cannot unmake what has been built through decades of sacrifice and ritual." But I was moving now, walking toward the flickering altar where the candles burned in their iron sconces, and with each step, the wooden cross in my hand grew warmer, and the impossible cathedral grew smaller, more like the simple country church it had been before dark powers corrupted it. "Maybe not," I admitted, "but it can give me enough time to find her." Behind the altar, hidden in shadows that were becoming less absolute with each passing moment, I found a wooden trapdoor set into the floor. The iron handle was warm to the touch, as if something with fever was breathing on it from below. The congregation of pale, motionless figures began to stir, their heads turning away from me and toward the fading figure in the black suit. Morrison's face contorted in an expression of confusion and dawning horror. Torres crossed himself and began whispering rapid Spanish prayers. They were waking up. The spell or possession or whatever supernatural force had claimed them was weakening as the cathedral's reality became unstable. I pulled open the trapdoor and warm air rushed up from the darkness below. Not the oily, oppressive atmosphere of the cathedral, but something cleaner, something that smelled like cedar wood and morning rain, and something else. "Help me." The voice was barely a whisper, but I recognized it from the voicemails Helen Clark had played for me. Megan Elizabeth Clark's voice, weak but undeniably alive. "I'm coming," I called down into the darkness, my flashlight beam revealing wooden steps descending into what looked like a root cellar or basement. "Hold on, Megan, I'm coming." The figure in the black suit made one last desperate attempt to stop me, lunging forward with hands that had become claws and a face that was now more demon than human. But the moment it touched me, the wooden cross in my hand flared with heat, and the creature dissolved like smoke in a strong wind. I descended the wooden steps into the darkness below. The basement of St. Bartholomew's Chapel was small and cramped, nothing like the impossible vastness of the cathedral above. Old wooden shelves lined the walls, holding mason jars filled with things I didn't want to identify. Candles burned in crude holders, providing just enough light to see the figure huddled in the far corner. Megan Elizabeth Clark looked exactly like her photographs, except for the haunted expression in her eyes and the way her auburn hair had grown out during 6 months of captivity. She was thin but alive, wearing the same hiking clothes she'd disappeared in, clutching something in her hands. Her Nikon camera. The memory card I'd thought was missing was still inside. "David?" she whispered as I approached. "David Sullivan? My mom said you were looking for me." "I'm here," I said, kneeling beside her and checking for obvious injuries. "We're going to get you out of this place." But as I helped her to her feet, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The wooden steps I'd just descended were gone. In their place was solid stone wall, as if the entrance to this basement had never existed. We were trapped. Above us, I could hear the sound of the cathedral collapsing, timber crashing, stone grinding against stone, the screams of the congregation as they regained consciousness and fled the disintegrating nightmare. But down here in this small basement, the walls were solid and real, and there was no way out. "The camera," Megan said, pressing the Nikon into my hands. "I got pictures, evidence of what this place really is, what it does to people." I looked at the camera's LCD screen and scrolled through the images she'd captured. What I saw defied every rational explanation I could construct. Photographs of the church interior shifting between normal wooden structure and bone cathedral. Images of people I recognized from missing person reports going back decades, all sitting in those pews with their pale, motionless faces. Pictures of the figure in the black suit conducting some kind of ritual at the altar, with symbols carved into human bones scattered around his feet. And one final image that made my hands shake so violently, I almost dropped the camera. A photograph of myself, taken apparently minutes ago, walking toward the altar with the wooden cross in my hand. But in the picture, my face wasn't my own. It was changing, shifting, becoming something inhuman, becoming the figure in the black suit. "David," Megan whispered, backing away from me. "David, look at your hands." I looked down and saw that my fingertips were becoming translucent, fading like the creature I'd thought I'd defeated. The wooden cross was still warm in my palm, but the warmth was different now. Hungry. Consuming. The church doesn't just claim its victims, I realized with growing horror. It replaces them, creates new guardians to lure in the next generation of protectors. Megan nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. I figured it out too late. The real David Sullivan probably died 6 months ago, the first time you came here with Morrison and Torres. What came back to the ranger station was just this. A copy, a trap designed to bring more people here. The basement around us began to shift and expand, becoming the impossible cathedral once again. But this time, I wasn't fighting it. This time, I was part of it. But the cross, I protested weakly, watching my hands fade to nothing. The faith, the protection, was real, Megan agreed, for the real David Sullivan. But you're not him, are you? You're just a memory of him, animated by whatever force controls this place. And memories can't have faith. The last thing I saw before my consciousness dissolved completely was Helen Clark's wooden cross falling from my incorporeal fingers and clattering on the stone floor of the cathedral that was once again vast and terrible and eternal. The last thing I heard was Megan Elizabeth Clark's voice, strong and determined despite her 6 months of captivity. "My name is Megan Elizabeth Clark, and I know the way out." Because she'd been here long enough to understand the truth that the false David Sullivan never could. The church didn't trap people in its physical structure. It trapped them in their own fear. And fear was something she'd learned to overcome. 3 weeks later, Chief Martinez found my Honda Civic abandoned at the Sol Duke trailhead, keys still in the ignition, my ranger badge sitting on the dashboard like an accusation. The search for me lasted exactly 4 days, longer than most missing person cases, but shorter than they'd looked for Megan Elizabeth Clark. Nobody found St. Bartholomew's Chapel. But Megan Elizabeth Clark walked out of Olympic National Forest on November 3, 2019, carrying her Nikon camera and a story that nobody believed. She told them about the cursed church, about the false ranger who'd tried to rescue her, about the decades of missing people who'd been lured to their doom by something that fed on those who tried to help others. She showed them the photographs. Nobody believed her. The official report listed both David Sullivan and Megan Elizabeth Clark as missing persons, despite the fact that Megan was sitting right there in Chief Martinez's office, sunburned and thin, but undeniably alive. Because the thing that walked out of those woods calling itself Megan Elizabeth Clark had eyes that were too old for its young face, and when it smiled, there were too many teeth. But Helen Clark didn't care about the details that troubled the investigators. She had her daughter back, and that was enough. Even if Megan sometimes spoke about people and places that had existed decades before she was born, even if she never slept through the night anymore, often found staring out her bedroom window toward the Olympic Mountains, even if the wooden cross she'd carved for protection had somehow ended up buried in their backyard, beneath the rose bushes, where Helen had never planted it. Some mysteries consume those who try to solve them, but sometimes the mystery solves you first. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror and comment your theory about what really happened to Megan Elizabeth Clark. I read every single one. My name is Austin Palmer, and at 6:47 a.m. my radio crackled with the call that would change my life forever. Unit 23, we have a code yellow, missing person at Glacier National Park. 22-year-old female, Megan Clark, last seen yesterday evening at approximately 1900 hours on the Avalanche Lake Trail. Family just reported. You copy? I was sitting in my Ford F-150, steam rising from my thermos of black coffee, watching the October sunrise paint the Montana peaks in shades of gold and crimson. My wedding ring caught the light as I reached for the radio. Just 30 minutes earlier, I'd kissed my wife Sarah goodbye, promising I'd be home for our daughter Emma's soccer game at 4 p.m. She was only 8, but she could already bend a ball like Beckham, and I'd never missed a game. Copy that, dispatch. Unit 23 responding. ETA 20 minutes to Trailhead. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as I fired up the engine. 22 years old. Same age I was when Emma was born. Some father was probably pacing his living room right now, coffee growing cold, phone pressed to his ear every 5 minutes hoping for updates. I knew that feeling. The gnawing terror that comes when someone you love simply vanishes. The drive to Avalanche Creek Trailhead took me through familiar territory. GPS coordinates 48.6789 again, 113.8812 W. I'd worked these trails for 12 years, knew every switchback, every creek crossing, every spot where cell service dropped to zero. My Motorola XPR 7550 digital radio crackled with periodic check-ins from other units as I wound through the Forest Service roads, Douglas firs towering overhead like cathedral pillars. At 7:23 a.m., I pulled into the gravel parking lot. Megan's red 2016 Honda Civic sat alone, covered in morning dew. Colorado plates, GHS 4721. I ran my gloved hand along the hood. Stone cold. She'd been here all night. I shouldered my 45-pound Kelty tactical pack, checking my gear with practiced efficiency. Garmin GPS unit, first aid kit, emergency flares, 550 paracord, multi-tool, water purification tablets, emergency blanket, headlamp with extra batteries. My Glock 17 sat snug in its holster, standard issue, though in 12 years I'd never drawn it for anything more dangerous than an aggressive grizzly. The morning air bit at my lungs, crisp and clean with that distinctive smell of pine needles, wet earth, and the faintest hint of snow from the peaks above. Temperature was dropping. My breath came out in small white puffs as I studied the trail register. Megan's name jumped out at me, written in careful cursive. Megan Clark, Denver, CO. Solo hike to Avalanche Lake, 10/17/18. Yesterday's date, 11 other names above hers, all checked back in. She was the only one unaccounted for. I keyed my radio. Dispatch Unit 23 at Avalanche Trailhead. Vehicle located, Colorado plates confirmed. Beginning track and sign cutting. Will maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. The trail started easy, a well-maintained path through lodgepole pine and aspen groves. But my ranger instincts were already picking up wrong notes in nature's symphony. Birds were too quiet. A red squirrel chattered nervously from a high branch, tail twitched in agitation. My boots crunched on fallen leaves as I moved, eyes scanning for sign. At mile marker 1.2, I found her first tracks. Size 8 hiking boots, Merrill brand by the tread pattern, heading toward the lake. The impressions were clear in a muddy section. She'd been moving at a steady pace, nothing to indicate distress. That's when I saw the other tracks. Bare feet. Human, but wrong somehow. The prints were deep, too deep for the size, as if whoever made them carried impossible weight. Toes were elongated with what looked like claw marks extending beyond where normal toes would end. The tracks paralleled Megan's for about 50 yards before veering off trail into thick underbrush. My skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with the October chill. I followed Megan's trail for another hour, past Hidden Creek Bridge and through the cedar groves. The wrongness in the air grew thicker with each step. My normally steady hand started to tremble slightly as I photographed each print with my iPhone X, GPS coordinates logged automatically. 48.6823 degree N, 113.8156 degree on W. At 9:15 a.m., I found her day pack. It sat upright against a massive cedar trunk 20 feet off the main trail. Too neat, too placed. No animal had dragged it there. Inside, water bottle half full, granola bars untouched, first aid kit, iPhone with cracked screen showing 15% battery, wallet with $237 cash and Colorado driver's license, and a Polaroid photo that made my blood turn to ice water. The photo showed Megan, smiling, arms outstretched toward the camera. But behind her, barely visible in the tree line, stood a figure. Tall, unnaturally thin, wearing what looked like tattered clothing. The face was a blur, but something about the posture screamed wrong. Human-shaped, but not human. My radio crackled. Unit 23, status report. Unit 23 to dispatch. My voice came out steady despite the hammer blow of my pulse. Located victim's day packet coordinates 48.6834 N, 130.8171 W. Possible evidence of unusual activity. Requesting backup unit and search dog team. Copy Unit 23. Backup ETA 45 minutes. Continue search pattern until arrival. I stuffed the photo in my shirt pocket next to my heart where I kept Emma's latest drawing. A stick figure family standing in front of our house. Daddy the Hero Ranger, she'd written in purple crayon. The trail beyond Megan's pack became a nightmare landscape. Trees bore strange marks. Deep gouges in bark, too regular to be animal damage, too savage to be human. The forest floor was churned as if something heavy had thrashed through, snapping branches and crushing undergrowth in a path of violence that made my ranger training scream warnings. And the smell started. Sweet at first, like overripe fruit, but underneath, decay, sulfur. Something that made my sinuses burn and my stomach clench. I'd smelled death before, found enough lost hikers who'd succumbed to exposure or accidents. This was different. This smell had malevolence in it. At 10:30 a.m., I heard the voice. Help, please, help me. Weak, desperate, coming from somewhere ahead through a thick stand of evergreens. My heart rate spiked as I moved toward the sound, unsnapping the retention strap on my holster. Every instinct screamed at me to wait for backup, but if Megan was alive, if she was hurt. I'm here, I called out. Park Service? Stay where you are, I'm coming to you. The voice called again, fainter now. Please, can't move. Hurt, I pushed through the pine boughs, needles catching on my uniform, branches whipping at my face. The smell grew stronger, that sickeningly sweet decay that made bile rise in my throat. 30 yards in, I broke through into a small clearing and saw him. An old man, maybe 60, sat with his back against a tree trunk. Dirty gray hair hung in greasy strands around a face mapped with lines of hard living. Torn clothing that might once have been a coat hung from shoulders that seemed to jut at impossible angles. One leg stretched out at an unnatural angle, definitely broken. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. Completely black, not just the pupils, the entire visible eye like looking into pools of crude oil. Thank God, the man wheezed, and his voice was different now, deeper, with an accent I couldn't place. I've been here all night, fell from up there. He gestured weakly toward a rocky outcrop above us. Think my legs busted pretty good. Every fiber of my being screamed danger, but my training kicked in. I approached cautiously, medical kit in hand. What's your name, sir? Are you hurt anywhere else? Name's Earl. Earl Simpson. Just the leg, I think. Maybe some ribs. His breathing was labored, but something about the rhythm felt wrong. Too measured. Too controlled for someone in genuine distress. I knelt beside him, close enough to smell the sweet rot that seemed to emanate from his skin. Up close, I could see that his fingernails were too long, too sharp, with what looked like dried blood caked underneath. Earl, I'm Austin Palmer, park ranger. I need to check your injuries before we move you. Have you seen a young woman, early 20s, blonde hair? She went missing on this trail. His black eyes fixed on mine, and something that might have been a smile played at the corners of his mouth. Pretty little thing. Oh yes, I seen her. She was helpful. The way he said helpful made my skin crawl. I reached for my radio with one hand, keeping the other near my weapon. Dispatch Unit 23, have located injured male at coordinates. Earl's hand shot out and clamped around my wrist with impossible strength. His grip felt like steel cables wrapped around my bones, crushing with pressure that made white lights dance in my vision. The radio fell from my nerveless fingers. Now that's not very neighborly, Earl said, and his voice had changed completely. Multi-tonal now, like several people speaking in perfect unison. Here I am, needing help, and you want to call for backup. Makes a body think you don't trust them. I tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. I could feel bones grinding together in my wrist. With my free hand, I went for my Glock, but Earl moved with inhuman speed. His other hand wrapped around my throat, lifting me partially off my knees. The girl trusted me, he said, and now his face was changing. The lines of age seemed to shift and crawl across his features like living things. His mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. Sweet little Megan, so eager to help a hurt old man, such a good heart. Black spots danced in my vision as his grip on my throat tightened. I managed to gasp out, Where is she? Earl's impossible smile widened. She's safe. So very safe. Deep down where the old hunger lives, where the earth opens to swallow up all the pretty things that walk above. With a surge of desperate strength, I drove my knee up into his ribs. The impact should have doubled him over, but it was like kicking a concrete wall. Earl laughed, a sound like grinding glass, and suddenly I was airborne. I hit the ground 20 feet away, the breath driven from my lungs, ribs screaming in protest. My vision blurred as I tried to push myself up, blood running from my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. Earl rose from his position against the tree, and I saw that his legs weren't broken at all. He moved with fluid grace, too tall now, limbs stretching in ways that defied human anatomy. His tattered clothes hung from a frame that seemed to be shifting, growing, bones popping and reforming beneath skin that rippled like water. 12 years you've walked these woods, Earl said, his voice echoing strangely in the clearing. 12 years, and you never knew what lies beneath, what hungers in the deep places, what calls to the lost and the lonely. I fumbled for my radio, fingers slick with blood from scraped palms. The unit crackled to life. Unit 23 requesting immediate backup, officer needs assistance. Earl's foot, now more claw than human extremity, stomped down on the radio, crushing it to plastic fragments. No, Austin Palmer. Family man, father, husband. This is between us now. The way he said my name, knew my life, made ice form in my veins. I managed to get to my feet, drawing my service weapon with shaking hands. "Stay back, I'm warning you." Earl tilted his head, the motion too far, neck bending at an angle that should have snapped vertebrae. "You smell like fear and love, Austin. Like a man with everything to lose. That makes you delicious. If this story is giving you chills, smash that follow button for more supernatural horror. What would you do in Austin Palmer's situation? Comment below. I fired 3 rounds center mass. The bullet struck Earl's torso with wet smacks, punching through his clothing, but he didn't go down. Dark fluid leaked from the wounds, not blood, but something thick and oily that seemed to move of its own accord. Earl looked down at the holes in his chest with what seemed like mild curiosity. Iron and lead, earthly things. You might as well throw pebbles at a hurricane. He lunged forward with speed that shouldn't have been possible, covering 20 feet in a single bound. I dove to the side, feeling claws rake across my shoulder, tearing through my ranger uniform like tissue paper. Hot blood ran down my arm as I rolled behind a fallen log. "The girl screamed your name," Earl called out conversationally as he stalked around my cover. Near the end. "Help me, Mr. Ranger, save me." "But you weren't there, were you, Austin? Too busy kissing your wife goodbye, promising to be home for dinner." Rage flared in my chest, hot and righteous. I thought of Emma's soccer game, her face lighting up when she spotted me in the bleachers. Sarah's sleepy smile as I'd kissed her forehead this morning. The family photo on my dashboard, taken just last month at Glacier Lake, all of us laughing as Emma fed chipmunks. "Shut up," I snarled, rising from behind the log with my weapon raised. "Just shut the hell up." Earl grinned, his mouth now a gaping maw filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. "There's the fire. There's what I want to taste. Fear is good, but rage has flavor." He came at me again, but this time I was ready. Years of training kicked in, not just ranger training, but the weekend mixed martial arts classes I took to stay in shape, to be strong for my family. I sidestepped his charge and emptied my magazine into his head and torso. The impact staggered him but didn't drop him. That dark fluid sprayed from multiple wounds, hissing where it hit the ground like acid, but I noticed something. He was moving slower, the wounds weren't closing as fast as before. "Getting tired, Earl?" I taunted, drawing my backup magazine. "Or whatever the fuck you really are?" His black eyes narrowed. "I am older than these mountains, boy. I was drinking blood when your ancestors were still climbing down from trees. One mortal with a pop gun won't..." I shot him in the mouth. The bullet punched through his palate and out the back of his skull. Earl staggered, that impossible mouth finally closing as dark ichor streamed down his chin. For a moment his form wavered, becoming translucent. That's when I heard it. A scream, faint and distant, coming from somewhere below us. Megan's voice, weak but alive. Earl heard it too. His head snapped toward the sound, and I saw genuine anger in those oil-black eyes for the first time. She should be silent by now. The deep places should have claimed her voice. I reloaded while backing toward the sound, keeping my weapon trained on Earl's wavering form. "Where is she? What did you do?" "She's in the old deep," Earl hissed, his voice becoming hollow, echoing. "The place where the earth opens its mouth. Where my kind feed on the lost and forgotten. But her spirit is stronger than most." Megan screamed again, closer now, and I realized the sound was coming from a depression in the ground I hadn't noticed before. What I'd taken for a shallow dip was actually the mouth of a cave, hidden by overgrown brush and fallen branches. Earl moved to block my path. "She belongs to the hunger now. As will you. As will that pretty wife and daughter you keep thinking about." The mention of Emma and Sarah sent white-hot fury through my veins. I thought of Emma's purple crayon drawing in my pocket, her stick-figure family safe and happy, of Sarah's coffee-scented kisses and the way she hummed while making breakfast, of promises to be home, to never let anything hurt them. "You don't get to talk about my family," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding my system. I charged. Earl lashed out with claws that could have gutted an elk, but I was already inside his reach. I grabbed him in a bear hug, pressing my service weapon against his torso and emptied the entire magazine into his core. The muzzle flashes lit up his face in strobing hellfire as dark blood sprayed across both of us. Earl shrieked, a sound like tearing metal that made my ears ring. His form began to dissolve, becoming more shadow than substance. But as he faded, his voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. The deep calls, Austin Palmer. It knows your scent now. It will find you. Find them. In dark places, in quiet moments when you think you're safe. It will come for what you love most. Then he was gone, leaving only the stench of sulfur and decay. I stood alone in the clearing, covered in that dark ichor, hands shaking from adrenaline crash. My radio was destroyed, my phone showed no signal, and Megan was still somewhere below ground, still alive if her screams meant anything. The cave mouth yawned before me like a wound in the earth. From its depths came the faintest sound, whimpering, human, and afraid. Megan Clark, 22 years old, some father's daughter, waiting in darkness for rescue that might never come. I thought of Emma's soccer game, still hours away, of my promise to be home, of the life I might be walking away from if I descended into that hole. But I was a ranger. I'd sworn an oath to protect and serve, and somewhere in the dark below, a girl who should have been planning her future was instead praying for salvation. I clicked on my headlamp, checked my remaining ammunition, 2 full magazines, and started down into the deep. The cave walls closed around me like a throat swallowing. My light beam barely penetrated the absolute blackness ahead, but I could hear water dripping somewhere in the distance, and beneath that, the soft sound of someone crying. "Megan?" I called out. "Megan Clark? This is Park Ranger Austin Palmer. I'm here to get you out." A weak voice answered from somewhere ahead. "Here. I'm here. Oh God, please be real." I followed her voice deeper into the cave system, my boots echoing on stone worn smooth by centuries of water flow. The passages branched and twisted, but I marked my route with reflective tape from my pack, laying down a trail of breadcrumbs for our escape. 20 minutes in, my light found her. Megan Clark sat against a cave wall, her blonde hair matted with blood and dirt. Her left ankle was clearly broken, swollen to twice its normal size. Cuts and bruises covered her arms and face, but she was alive, conscious, and her eyes showed the fierce light of someone who hadn't given up hope. "You're real," she whispered as I knelt beside her. I thought I was going to die down here." "Not today," I said, already checking her injuries with my first aid kit. "I'm getting you out of here. What happened? How long have you been down here?" "That man, Earl, he seemed hurt, needed help. But when I got close, he changed, became something else, something that wasn't human." Her voice shook as she spoke. "He dragged me down here, said the hunger wanted me, that I'd feed the deep." I splinted her ankle with supplies from my pack, working as quickly as I could. Every second in this place felt like tempting fate. "Can you walk with support?" "I think so, but Austin..." She grabbed my arm, eyes wide with terror. "There are others down here. Bones. Lots of bones, and sometimes I hear them moving." A chill that had nothing to do with the cave's temperature ran down my spine. Moving? Like they're trying to get up, to walk. Earl said the deep keeps what it kills, makes them serve the hunger. I helped Megan to her feet, letting her lean on my shoulder. "Well, Earl's gone, and we're leaving, right now." The journey out was a nightmare of narrow passages and loose stone. Megan's weight on my shoulder made every step a challenge, and twice we had to stop when the pain in her ankle became too much. But she never complained, never asked me to leave her behind. Halfway to the surface, we heard them. Footsteps, multiple sets, shuffling and dragging across stone, coming from deeper in the cave system, following our trail. "Don't look back," I told Megan, increasing our pace despite her injured ankle. "Whatever you do, don't look back." But I looked. My light caught glimpses of shapes moving in the darkness behind us. Human-shaped but wrong, joints bent at impossible angles, eye sockets empty, but somehow still seeing. The bones of Earl's victims, animated by whatever malevolent force controlled the deep. We climbed faster, my lungs burning, legs screaming in protest. Behind us, the shuffling grew louder, closer. I could hear the click and scrape of bone on stone, the wet sound of decay in motion. The cave mouth appeared ahead like a promise of salvation. Daylight streamed down from above, painting everything in shades of gold and green that looked like paradise after the absolute black of the deep. As we climbed toward the surface, I felt something grab my ankle. I looked down to see a skeleton in the tattered remains of hiking clothes, its jaw hanging open in a soundless scream. More bones emerged from cracks in the cave wall. Hands, arms, entire rib cages reaching for us with mindless hunger. I drew my weapon and fired into the mass of animated remains. Bones shattered and scattered, but kept moving, kept reaching. I lifted Megan bodily and threw her toward the cave mouth. "Climb! Get out!" She scrambled up and over the rim while I emptied my magazine into the horde of bones. But for every one I destroyed, 2 more took its place. Bony fingers wrapped around my legs, my arms, trying to drag me back into the deep. That's when I thought of Emma's drawing in my pocket, of Sarah's sleepy smile, of promises to be home. Love. That's what had driven me into these woods. Love for a stranger's daughter. Love that made me risk everything to save someone I'd never met, and love that would get me home to my own family. I pulled the pin from an emergency flare and dropped it into the mass of bones. The red flame caught on dry remains like kindling, spreading rapidly through the horde. The skeletons fell back, animated by evil but still vulnerable to fire. I hauled myself out of the cave mouth and rolled away from the opening. Behind us, the deep filled with red light and the sound of destruction. Megan sat against a tree, tears streaming down her dirt-stained face. Is it over? I looked back at the cave mouth, now sealed by a rockfall triggered by the flare's explosion. Deep beneath tons of stone, I could still feel something moving, something angry and hungry and patient. For now, I said. 3 hours later, the search and rescue team found us beside Avalanche Creek. Megan was airlifted to Kalispell Regional Medical Center, where doctors treated her broken ankle, dehydration, and various cuts and abrasions. Her official statement listed her injuries as the result of a fall into a sinkhole, with no mention of possessed homeless men or animated skeletons. My official report read the same way. Equipment malfunction on my radio explained the communication blackout. The destroyed device was listed as damaged in a fall. But that night, safe in my own home with Sarah asleep beside me and Emma's breathing soft and even from down the hall, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. Earl's final words echoed in my memory. The deep calls, Austin Palmer. It knows you're sent now. I'd saved Megan Clark. I'd made it home for Emma's soccer game. She scored twice. I'd kept my promise to my family. But in quiet moments, in dark corners, I sometimes feel something watching. Something patient and hungry, waiting for the right moment to collect what it thinks it's owed. The deep remembers, and the deep never forgets. Holy hell, that was intense. Did that ending blow your mind? Like, if you want more terrifying ranger stories, follow for daily supernatural horror, and comment your theory about what really happened to Megan Clark in those caves. I read every single one. What would you have done in Austin Palmer's situation? Would you have risked everything for a stranger? Share your thoughts below.